I never expected that at 73 years old. I'd be installing surveillance cameras, wiring up a fence, and going head to head with a self-proclaimed enforcer of suburban order. But here we are. My name's Ray Wallace, retired electrical engineer, grandfather of four, and apparently public enemy number one to a woman named Linda Garrison, our HOA president, with a god complex and a clipboard permanently glued to her hand. I moved to Cactus Ridge 35 years ago with my wife, Diane. We chose it for the quiet desert views and the kind of neighborly calm where folks waved from porches and shared surplus tomatoes. Back then, the HOA was just a handful of volunteers making sure the pool didn't turn green, and someone brought potato salad to the 4th of July barbecue. But things changed, new blood, new rules. And then came Linda. Linda moved into Lot 17 about 6 years ago, right after her third divorce, from what the gossip mill says. She introduced herself to me with a laminated binder titled Covenants and Compliance, and a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. The moment she got voted in as HOA president, the neighborhood transformed. Flags were measured. Fence slats counted. Paint chips matched against some mystery code book she seemed to have authored herself. People were too tired to argue. But I wasn't most people. I started building a playhouse for my youngest grandson, Caleb. He's turning 8 next month and told me all he wanted was a place to read comic books where grown-ups can't hear him practicing to be a superhero. I sketched it out myself, painted wood, little windows, even a solar light for reading. I was halfway through putting the frame up in the backyard when it happened. I was sipping coffee at sunrise, just enjoying the stillness, when the sound of rustling metal jolted me out of my chair. At first, I thought it was a coyote or maybe a raccoon, but when I turned toward the fence, I saw someone climbing over it. A woman mid-30s, HOA polo tucked in, khaki pants, camera around her neck. I stood up, heart thumping, and before I could even open my mouth, she had her boots on my lawn, snapping pictures of the playhouse like she was documenting a crime scene. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're on private property. What the hell do you think you're doing?" She didn't even blink. "Mr. Wallace, I'm conducting a visual inspection regarding a potential violation." "Mrs. Garrison received a report of an unapproved livestock structure on your property." "Livestock? That's a playhouse for my grandson," I said, pointing to the tiny door and cartoon decals Caleb picked out himself. "You climb my fence without permission," she shrugged. "Per Section 8 of the HOA rules, we have inspection rights. You'll receive a notice in the mail." Then she turned and climbed back over the fence as casually as someone crossing their own backyard. I stood there, coffee forgotten, fists clenched. When I told my granddaughter Erin, who's a civil rights attorney, taking a sabbatical after a brutal custody battle, she nearly knocked her tea over. "That's illegal, Grandpa." She trespassed. "Inspection rights don't include acrobatics over a fence," she said, already opening her laptop. "They need written notice. At least 48 hours. And it has to be from the HOA, not some badge-wearing peon." The next day, a notice showed up in my mailbox. A $300 fine for unauthorized livestock housing and a warning for obstructing HOA enforcement. That's when something old in me stirred something Diane used to call my righteous fuse. I looked at the half-built playhouse, then at the photo of Diane on the mantel. "Would you let this go?" I whispered. The smile in her picture said no. Aaron and I decided to get serious. We installed 4 discrete security cameras around the property, motion-triggered, with cloud backup. My buddy Carl from my engineering days lent me some gear to wire the back fence not to hurt, but to discourage climbers. Just enough current to make someone think twice. A legal deterrent. And Aaron added the pièce de résistance, assigned private property. Security system active. Use gate. No exceptions. We didn't wait long. 3 days later, while I was at the hardware store picking up wood sealer, my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Live footage showed the same woman climbing over the fence again. Same camera. Same attitude. This time, when her boot hit the top rail, a familiar voice called out Ray. "Breakfast is ready." It was Diane's voice. Aaron had used old home videos and an AI voice filter to recreate it. The woman froze mid-step, startled. Then zap, she yelped, lost her balance, and tumbled onto the grass. I got home to find Aaron reviewing the footage, trying not to laugh. "This is gold," she said. "We've got trespass, unauthorized surveillance, and possible theft." She took one of Caleb's toy shovels with her. We emailed the footage and a formal cease and desist to the HOA board. Within 24 hours, Linda was on the local news, declaring I had set a dangerous electric trap and endangered an HOA officer. She called me a menace. What she didn't know was that Aaron had already shared the full unedited footage with timestamps, voice warnings, signage, and proof the gate was unlocked with the district attorney and the state HOA oversight committee. 2 days later, we were invited to a public board meeting. I showed up with Aaron, Carl, and 3 neighbors who'd quietly told me they'd had enough of Linda's reign. One had been fined for having too many shades of green in his lawn. The board meeting was packed. Linda stood at the front, in full power suit mode, ready to spin the story. But before she could open her mouth, the committee rep from the state stood up and said, "We've reviewed the footage. There is no violation on Mr. Wallace's part. However, there are multiple breaches of protocol by this HOA, including trespass and harassment." Linda's face dropped. And then, the final blow. Thomas, a soft-spoken board member I barely knew, stood and said, "There's something else. I have copies of emails from Mrs. Garrison encouraging board members to find specific homes to pressure sales. It's all tied to a real estate firm she partially owns." Gasps rippled across the room. Linda turned pale. She tried to argue, to deny it, but the committee had already begun drafting a motion for a full audit. That same evening, the woman who trespassed on my yard was served with a citation. Linda stepped down 2 days later and quietly left town. Now the playhouse is finished. Caleb loves it. Erin's confidence is back. She's even taken on a case representing another homeowner. Linda tried to bully. The new HOA board. Well, they're a little more neighborly these days, and the fence, still electrified, still talking, but only when needed.